As I sit here typing, my heart still races at the memory of that horrifying night. It was just a typical sleepover at my friend Sarah's house. We'd gathered in her cozy basement, a group of giggly teenagers ready for a night of fun. Little did we know, the night would unfold into a chilling tale that still haunts me to this day. The basement was dimly lit, casting eerie shadows across the walls. The air was thick with anticipation as we settled in, armed with snacks and blankets. Sarah had promised us a night we wouldn't forget, and boy, did she deliver. As the hours passed, we shared stories, played games, and laughed until our sides hurt. But as the clock struck midnight, a sense of unease settled over the room. It was as if a dark cloud had descended upon us, suffocating the warmth and light. That's when Sarah suggested we try something new. She had recently acquired an old Ouija board from a thrift shop, claiming it would add an extra thrill to our night. I'd always been skeptical of such things, but in the spirit of adventure, I agreed to give it a try. We gathered around the board, our fingers trembling with a mixture of excitement and fear. Sarah led the séance, asking if there were any spirits present who wished to communicate with us. At first, there was nothing but silence, the planchette sitting still beneath our fingertips. But then, ever so slowly, it began to move. At first, it was just a gentle glide across the board, spelling out simple words like hello and friend. We laughed nervously, dismissing it as nothing more than our own subconscious movements. But then the messages grew darker. The planchette spelled out names we didn't recognize, along with cryptic warnings of impending doom. Sarah's laughter faded, replaced by a look of genuine fear. She tried to end the séance, but the board refused to cooperate, dragging us deeper into its twisted game. That's when things took a sinister turn. The lights flickered, casting ominous shadows across the room. A chill swept through the air, sending shivers down our spines. And then, out of nowhere, we heard it. A blood-curdling scream pierced the silence, echoing through the darkness with a piercing intensity that froze us in our tracks. It was a sound unlike anything I'd ever heard before, filled with anguish and desperation, as if someone, or something, was trapped in a never-ending nightmare. We huddled together, our hearts racing as the scream grew louder and more agonizing. It seemed to reverberate off the walls, surrounding us with its haunting presence and filling us with a bone-deep dread. With trembling hands, Sarah reached for the flashlight, desperate to pierce the darkness and reveal the source of our terror. But as the beam cut through the darkness, we were met with an image that will haunt me forever. Standing before us was a figure cloaked in shadows, its features twisted into a grotesque parody of a human face. Its eyes burned with a malevolent light, boring into our souls with a hunger that chilled us to the bone. We screamed in terror, scrambling to escape the basement and the horrors that lurked within. But no matter how fast we ran, it seemed to follow, its presence looming over us like a dark cloud. It wasn't until we reached the safety of the outside world that we dared to breathe a sigh of relief. But even then, the memory of that night will linger, casting darkness over our once carefree lives. So if you ever find yourself tempted to dabble in the supernatural, remember my story. Remember the terror that might be lurking in the darkness, waiting to ensnare its unwary web of nightmares. Stay safe, my friends, and may you never have to face the darkness that I did. As I sat in the dimly lit living room of my friend's house, the eerie glow of the TV casting long shadows across the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. We were having a sleepover, a typical Friday night for us, but tonight felt different. Maybe it was the way the wind howled outside, rattling the windows like a restless spirit trying to force its way in. Or perhaps it was the way my friend's dog, usually so calm and friendly, kept whimpering and staring at the staircase leading up to the second floor. Whatever it was, I couldn't ignore the sense of unease creeping up my spine. My friend Emily seemed oblivious to my discomfort as she chattered excitedly about the latest horror movie she'd seen. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and I tried to focus on her words rather than the growing sense of dread gnawing at me from the inside. But as the night wore on and the clock ticked closer to midnight, I found it increasingly difficult to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. It was during a pause in our conversation when I first heard it, a soft creaking sound coming from upstairs, like someone walking across the floorboards. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, and exchanged a nervous glance with Emily. She must have heard it too, because her eyes widened with fear, mirroring my own. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. Emily nodded, her face pale in the dim light. "Yeah," she replied, her voice barely audible. "But it's probably just the house settling or something." I wanted to believe her, I really did. But deep down, I knew it wasn't the house settling. There was something else up there. We tried to brush it off and go back to our conversation, but the atmosphere in the room had shifted, tainted by an unspoken fear that hung heavy in the air. We both knew that neither of us would be able to sleep until we knew for sure what was causing the strange noises upstairs. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I suggested that we go investigate, convinced that it was better to confront whatever was up there than to sit in fear, waiting for it to come to us. Emily hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting nervously towards the staircase, but ultimately she nodded her agreement. Armed with nothing but a flashlight, we made our way cautiously up the stairs, each step echoing loudly in the silence of the house. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end as we reached the top. The hallway stretched out before us, shrouded in darkness, with doors lining both sides. We hesitated, unsure of where to start, when suddenly we heard it again, the soft creaking of floorboards, this time coming from the room at the very end of the hall. Heart pounding in my chest, I walked over and took a deep breath before pushing the door open, the light from my flashlight cutting through the darkness like a knife. What I saw on the other side made my blood run cold. Standing in the center of the room was a figure, its back turned to us, its movements slow and deliberate. It was hunched over a safe, their hands skillfully manipulating the lock in a rhythmic, almost hypnotic fashion. I could feel Emily's grip on my arm tighten as we stood frozen in the doorway, unable to tear our eyes away from the scene unfolding before us. And then, as if sensing our presence, the figure stopped moving and slowly turned to face us. What I then saw will haunt me for the rest of my days. A masked man, dressed all in black, his eyes gleaming with malice behind his mask, and in his hands, he held a bag filled with stolen valuables. Without a word, Emily and I turned and fled, our screams echoing through the empty house as we ran blindly down the stairs and out into the cold night air. We didn't stop until we were safely back at my house, huddled together on the couch. In the days that followed, we learned that the man had broken into several homes in the neighborhood, stealing whatever he could get his hands on before disappearing into the night. But despite our brush with danger, we were lucky. We had escaped with our lives, our friendship now stronger than ever. As I sit here, trying to gather my thoughts and calm my racing heart, I can still feel the chill of that night creeping up my spine. It was just supposed to be a typical sleepover with the boys, filled with gaming marathons and endless junk food. Little did we know, it would turn into a nightmare we'd never forget. It all started innocently enough. My buddies and I had gathered at my place for our monthly gaming session. We were all hardcore gamers, and these nights were our way of unwinding. The room was filled with the glow of multiple screens, the sound of controllers clicking, and the occasional outburst of laughter. As the night wore on, the hours seemed to blur together. We lost track of time, completely absorbed in the virtual world unfolding before us. It wasn't until deep into the night that things took a dark turn. I remember it vividly. We were in the midst of a particularly intense round of Call of Duty when a sudden power outage plunged the room into darkness. At first, we all laughed it off, attributing it to the storm raging outside. But then, things started to get weird. As we fumbled for our phones to use as flashlights, we noticed that something felt off. The air seemed heavier, and an eerie silence had descended upon the room. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears as I scanned the room, trying to shake off the growing sense of unease. That's when we heard it. A faint scratching sound coming from somewhere in the darkness. It was barely audible at first, but it quickly grew louder, more insistent. Panic set in as we realized that we were not alone. With trembling hands, we tried to locate the source of the sound, but it seemed to be coming from all around us. It was as if the very walls of the house had come to life. Suddenly, without warning, the scratching stopped, replaced by a bone-chilling silence. We huddled together, our minds racing with fear and uncertainty. What was happening? Was it some kind of prank, or something far more sinister? Just as we were about to make a run for it, the power flickered back on, bathing the room in harsh fluorescent light. We blinked in the sudden brightness, disoriented and shaken. Relief washed over us as we realized that whatever had happened was over now. We laughed nervously, chalking it up to a freak occurrence. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had just brushed up against something beyond our understanding. As dawn broke and the first light of morning filtered through the windows, my friends packed up their gear and prepared to leave. But as we stepped outside into the crisp morning air, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It's been weeks since that night, but the memory still haunts me. I can't help but wonder what really happened in the darkness of my own home. Was it just a glitch in the power grid, or something more sinister? I may never know for sure, but one thing's for certain. I'll never look at a sleepover the same way again.